I did a lot of stuff wrong.
Mhm.
I got rid of a lot of leaders the wrong way, not a pastoral way, an aggressive way.
Mhm.
I can think of because the story of 60 to 600, if that's what we're titling it, it isn't all up and to the right.
Well, welcome to Simply Strategic Ministry Podcast. I am your host, Landon, and I'm going to be co-hosting today with my good buddy, Patrick Weichel. Pat, how are you doing today?
Dude, I'm doing great. How you doing, bro?
I'm awesome, man. This podcast is designed to help you grow your ministry through simple strategies and scalable systems. And if you're new to our coaching community, you may not know that Patrick helped found. He was one of the founders of Simply Strategic Ministry, and so his life has changed a lot. So I wanted to draw him into the conversation today, talk about what he's up to now, and kind of reflect on the past wins from his last ministry assignment. So, Pat, tell me, just give us the update of what you're doing now, where you've been, and what you are currently doing. Give us the update.
Yeah, so for the last 5 years, I've been in Houston, Texas as the lead student pastor of United City Youth at United City Church in Northeast Houston. But over the last month, I have transitioned off staff at United City to come be the next gen pastor at a church here in Tallahassee with a guy that I used to work with before, Luke Harper. He's actually been on this podcast,
Yeah.
led C3
The
College.
most viewed podcast, might I add. Shout out to Luke Harper.
Shout out to Luke.
Shout out to the search committee that put it in his prospectus, and all the church members went and watched it.
Yeah, they put it in his bio, and so we appreciate them for that. But yeah, so I'm now overseeing birth through college age ministries, and helping a church just capitalize on opportunities that are around them, and grow into the next healthy version of the iteration of the life of this church here in northern Tallahassee, up here in Bradfordville. And we couldn't be any more excited about that. And just it's been cool personally, to watch how God has taken us from where we first met to I was a next gen resident. To
Yeah.
then a kids pastor, then to an associate student pastor, then to a student pastor for the last 5 years. And now to get the opportunity to oversee all of Next Gen Ministry has been
Mm-hmm.
just really confirming for where God has taken us to where we're going. And man, it's awesome. I know we're going to talk about that in today's podcast, but to end a season of ministry for 5 years, revitalizing a church, to step in to do it again. When we were young and, I was 21, I don't think I ever thought, man, I'm going to be helping revitalize churches, or I'm going to help breathe fresh wind and seize opportunity in established churches. But that's kind of just the path that God has clarified for us. And so we're excited to be doing that here.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Yeah, so I'm a little bitter because just about every year, if it wasn't at United City Church or one of another church down there, I had a barbecue pilgrimage I went on every single year.
Yeah, you did.
And I'm a little bit sad that may not happen as frequently. I'm counting on you, Sagemont, to bring me back to my barbecue. I preach for barbecue. Yeah, shout out to Cody, Kentucky.
Barbecue,
man. So, but I'm excited, dude. Yeah. So when we first started serving in full-time capacities together, Patrick was the kids pastor at the church that I first pastored at. Patrick was a great kids pastor. Honestly, one of the best kids pastors I've ever got to meet, because he didn't think like a kids pastor. He thought just like a strategic pastor who loved making disciples, whether it was kids, students, or adults.
Yep.
And so, next gen pastor for you, man, it's been a long time coming, because you've always thought well by that. But so the first time I joined you down at United City, this was before SSM and all that. This was you had jumped in, I guess it was 2018, 2019.
2019. I got to United City in October 2019. So I think you came February 2020, right before.
Okay, right before the pandemic. Okay. Yeah. So I come down and I preach at one of their biggest events, which was called Encounter Weekend, which became one of their biggest events.
Yeah.
This one was not one of their biggest events.
No.
We were in a construction zone because your former pastor, Pastor Chris Kuba, was revitalizing the church. We were rebranding. A lot of growth happened. He's a great leader. And then when I preached not this past year, but the year before that, and kind of weekend again. And I mean, 500 plus in the room. God had just completely changed this ministry in 5 years. And so
Yeah.
I wanted today to talk about, there was a lot of history at what was First Baptist Humble
Yeah.
that became United City. And
Yeah.
so you were not the first student pastor. You're not the last student pastor there.
Yeah.
But you did play a huge role in
Mhm.
taking a student ministry that started. I mean, when you first started in student ministry, how many students were there?
Yeah, well, when we first started, they actually weren't doing check-ins, and
Okay.
I'm sure we'll talk about
So
that.
first rule of thumb here: if you're not doing check-ins,
Yeah, yeah,
do check.
they weren't doing check-ins or head count. I mean, they weren't tracking attendance. But I would go back often later on to the first night we did start taking or doing check-ins. We had 64 our first night
Okay. All right.
that we can go back and track it. And
Okay.
then when the year that I left, our biggest Wednesday night, we had over 600.
So 60 to 600. That
Yeah.
sounds like a good. That sounds like a good title for this podcast.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and so, I mean, that's unheard of. I mean, um, to cross the 500 barrier
Yeah.
is something that probably 0.1% of the student ministries in America do. And the great thing about it is it wasn't like it was some flashy, all
Yeah.
the big youth leaders and conferences were talking about this. It was just running a play. You
Yeah.
were seeking after Jesus. You were doing all the intangibles, which is being holy before the Lord and pursuing His will. But you were also building strategically. And
Yeah.
here's the thing: when you were at Cross Church in Arkansas, or when you were at Foothills Church in Maryville, or when you were at United City, and probably where you're at now, you're probably running similar plays.
Absolutely.
So from 60 to 600, okay,
Yeah.
when you first took over, what was the culture like of the student ministry?
Yeah. I mean, I think the best way that I could describe the culture when we first got there was just insider focused.
Okay, yeah. Youth
And
group mentality?
yeah, yeah, but I think, and I think 5 years ago, I was, like, really ambivalent towards that. Now I understand how that happened, and I
Mhm.
understand how it happens. I think the reality was, the MO at the time was, "Hey, these are the kids we have in our church that are just coming. How do we take care of them the best?" You
Yeah,
know?
yeah. That's what
And
shepherds do.
so yeah, and so it was just, hey, they're not thinking about scale because they're thinking about who they have. They're not thinking
Yeah,
strategy
yeah,
as far as, man, how do we get from point A to point B? They're thinking about what strategy do we do to make all these kids
yeah,
feel known, seen, and needed and discipled. Now, I would say in and of itself, those things aren't bad things. But the irony is you can become so insider focused and trying to like just serve the few that you have that you begin to
yeah.
lose the few that you have, you know?
That's good.
And so there was, yeah, there was just a complete lack of any kind of sense of how are we going to reach the schools and the lost kids around us. I think the desire was there. They would love if lost kids came. They would love to see,
Mhm.
lost kids come to know Jesus. But it was more of like, okay, Wednesday's coming, we're going to pull off Wednesday. Then Sunday's coming,
Mhm.
we're going to pull off Sunday.
Yeah.
And there was there wasn't a big sense of like, what are we building towards? And so there wasn't,
Mhm.
if maybe you've been around SSM a while, me and my domino and momentum talk, but there was just no, one thing falling into the next thing. It was just kind of, this is who we are. We're
Yeah.
existing and we're in this space. And, and these are the kids that we have in our church. And
Yeah.
so walking into that from where I had just come was like, having a bucket of cold water dumped over your head because it was just so foreign to me and everything that I had known. So
Mhm. Yeah.
immediately right away, I'll never forget, I got there in October 2019. Well, we had D Now coming, and stop me if I'm getting ahead of the story of where you
Good.
want to go. But so immediately I knew like, hey, there's a lot of operational stuff that needed to be cleaned up. There's a lot of budget stuff that needed to be cleaned up, and our church was going through some stuff at the same time that necessitated a lot of like budgetary and staffing
Yeah.
changes. And so we're
Yeah.
having this tumultuous time. Um, and we're trying to fight through that. And at the same time, I'm trying to establish culture, establish vision, establish relationship with the people I serve with, and cast this kind of contagious vision of this is who we are, this is who we're going to
Yeah.
be.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
really I began to do that. I got to United City, which was First Baptist Humble at the time, saw the insider focus. And I remember, we've been friends for a long time. We would text and talk about this. After Wednesdays, I would preach, I would give invitations, and we had never done invitations before, and would give invitations, which was fresh. And then I would immediately leave and go hang out with our students, like at,
Uh-huh.
like at restaurants and stuff like
Yeah.
that. And I
Hmm.
just began to gain relationship and then say, hey, man, what would it look like if we began to gather all of your friends who don't know Jesus in this
Yes.
place? And we saw a
Yes.
move of God happen.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. So you're casting vision. You're casting vision, but you're not. It's not a vision series. It's a
Mm-mm.
series of conversations with students
Yeah. And I
about vision.
specifically started with the seniors because I knew
Yeah.
like it was October. So I had a whole nother semester out of them. So for me, I was like,
Hmm.
okay, some strategy may say, hey, leave the seniors be. But
Okay.
I went with them and said, hey, who is willing to lay a foundation that they will never see the payout for?
Mm.
Like, who's willing to lock arms with? And I would say some of the students I was closest with over the last 5 years were those kids, like that first year.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
just like, hey, who wants to create something? Who wants to lay the groundwork for something that has never been seen before? And
It's
I
so
just
good.
spent so much time with them, building into them, living life with them, going to their games, going to their practices, going to their schools, that they began to believe like, oh wow, we can't do this. Like we
Yeah.
could see God do something crazy. And we never preached a vision series. We never,
Yeah.
did a
Yeah.
rally from the stage. We were just getting with kids and saying, hey, we think this can happen. We were making space in our home
Yeah.
on Tuesday nights for them to come gather. And we were just bleeding vision and culture and
Yeah.
identity all over them. And I remember the other thing too that I was doing is um just in love, like, I'll be honest. We got there that first Wednesday, it was just tough. It was not what we were used to. The worship was tough, the environment was tough, and I just remember I made a commitment to, Kylie and I were sitting in the front row, and I squeezed her hand, I leaned over and I said, "We're here now. We have to set the tone and let them see it in us first." And so for the first year, I just decided, "Hey, everyone's gonna see it in me before I say it." So I sat in the front and I worshiped like crazy. Like
Yeah.
I was the community that I wanted my small group leaders, which they were life group leaders that I wanted them to do. I ran
Mhm.
campus ministry the way that I wanted, other people to do it. And I modeled internal stuff for the staff of like what I wanted to see in them. And I just knew for a short season I was gonna have to be the vision myself and then turn and ask staff, the seniors and other people like, hey, who's with me? Like, who's going to do this with me?
Dude, that's really good, man. And because I think in a coaching community like ours, where we kind of geek out on the practical strategies and stuff
Yeah.
like that, I think sometimes we think that, oh, if there's a silver bullet strategy that we do, this
Yeah.
is going to. So, like, I'm in the church planning world, and there's one major church planning organization that gives you a giant loan for marketing at the end of it. And it's just like run Facebook ads, run Google ads.
Yeah.
And if you do that, that's going to get people there for that first Sunday. And I think people are looking for that like silver bullet. But really, what you're saying is, dude, because I've watched Pat at work, he is a gritty dude.
Yeah.
And behind everything at SSM, whether it's a recruiting campaign that we're talking, like it's the grit of like we send 1,000 text messages. We
Yeah.
show up to campus ministries and we sit in awkward middle schools and have conversations about things we do not care about with seventh graders. We
Yeah.
show up early to FCAs. We stay late at football games just to walk up and down the bleachers. Like behind all the simple strategies in a scalable system is a gritty, hardworking student pastor.
Yeah.
And then so really you just said, all right, I'm vision casting. Like I'm all about the vision. And again, we start there with any coaching that we do. Is
Yeah.
we're like, hey, do you bleed your vision? and then it's grit. So you do that, you start kind of bleeding the vision. You're not necessarily, doing a vision series, but I've watched Pat. Everything Pat does is vision.
Yeah.
Everything, whether it's his volunteer talk. I remember sitting at Encounter Weekend, and dude, you'd been there like 4 months at this point in time, so you didn't have the cred to do this, but you did it anyways. And you were like, "Listen, some of you all, you're coming in here not ready for God to move, and you need to leave and not come back." You may have probably said it a little kinder than that,
Yeah, no.
but we always are. We were always, when we worked together, we were the bulldog and chihuahua. I'd nip at their heels and he'd run them over like a bulldog. But that was old. That's old. That's we were in our 20s, in our younger years.
Yeah.
But you did that. You were casting vision. You correct with vision. Everything you do, even like one little quip you used to say all the time is you would cast vision about taking notes, and you'd say note takers are history makers. And it just caught in the culture. So if you're looking to fix something you didn't break, which is what you're basically doing, you didn't break the student ministry, but you came along and you helped fix it. First thing he just said was you got to be a visionary. You got to be high on your vision. And the second thing is you got to grit and just have the conversations. Hang out with the students, be the vision. So then you move into a practical side of beginning to build this ministry. Okay.
Yeah. Well,
what were some of the things you did?
Yeah. So let me wrap that thought up, and then that segues into the practical. It's everyone wants to talk about the system, and we love systems, but I was taught that there is it's system in ministry is like a warehouse. If you have a really great like conveyor belt, but you have no boxes, like you have no product to put on the conveyor belt, you have nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have a bunch of boxes and you don't have a conveyor belt, you have a mess on your hands.
Ooh, that's good.
And so I would say the grit gets you the boxes. And at the point that you have the boxes, then you need the conveyor belt to say, hey, this is how this keeps going.
Yeah.
And I knew that. And I knew that, I had to go be the vision, and I had to cast vision and confront with vision and celebrate with vision and challenge with vision. And, then when that thing grew and we started seeing, 64 turn into 100 to turn into 120 to 150 and whatever, and even going into that first Encounter Weekend and out of it, it was like, okay, hey, now we have this thing that's so big to steward this. We need systems.
Yeah, that's good.
So it's like, everyone's always asking me, hey, what's the best thing so I never have to hit a text list? And I'm like, hey, if you've never hit a text list, you don't have a text list worth systematizing. And so it's like I started thinking about, getting texting systems and Zapier off of Woohoo forms and stuff like that when I was like, I have 1,000 contacts and I can't do this.
Yeah.
And
I've watched this personally. Even when you do have 1,000 contacts, sometimes you just contact 1,000 people.
Sometimes you just do it. And so, so when we came out of that Encounter Weekend, it became apparent and super clear to me, hey, we need a system to onboard leaders. And we talk about onboarding leaders differently. I think what a lot of people heard was how to get a leader on board. That's not what I said. What I said is, how do we onboard leaders? How do we identify them, shoulder tap them, assimilate them, and then train them ongoing? That's what onboarding means.
Yeah.
How do we follow up with first-time guests? Right? Like that's a big one.
Yeah.
And then how do we handle what we call POFs, professions of faith, and spiritual next steps? Hey, I want to give my life to Christ. I want to get baptized. I want to join a group. I want to start to serve. Any of those spiritual next steps. It was like, hey, we have so many boxes in each of those categories. If we don't create scalable systems that are simple, then we have just done the same thing that people did before us. We just created a new level, and we're just going to maintain that level and never keep going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so
you just identified 3 core kind of sets of system. I know there's different systems within that, but you're saying your volunteer systems, how you onboarding, you recruiting, onboarding, training, kind of all 3 in one kind of package there. And then how are you handling first-time guests? How are you How are they coming? How are they getting followed up with? How are they getting assimilated? And
Yep.
then a decision system as well.
Yeah. And then
So
decision team.
we would at SSM, that's one of the main things that we coach on are those three systems. Now
Yeah.
we are, we can't teach you to hunger after the Spirit of God. Like you're gonna have to. That's between you and the Lord, okay? But if you're gritty and you start putting in those systems, and the rain comes, you're gonna have a gutter for it to flow.
Yeah.
And so I love that. Which one for you do you feel like as you're coaching leaders? Because Pat is a coach. He coaches lots of dudes,
Yeah.
and which one do you feel like is probably, if you're starting over again, what are you probably starting with? Which one are you working on
Yeah.
first?
I mean, it's the one I started on there. It's onboarding leaders. I think
Yeah.
everything rises, and I've said this to so many different people in so many different ministry contexts, and now so many different churches. Everything we do rises and falls on the quantity and quality of our leaders. Our goal is to get more leaders who get more done. That's the goal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because if I get more leaders, like I just, the guys I'm coaching, like coaching a guy right now, it's like, man, I can directly pinpoint the growth of your serve team to the growth of your ministry. And I
Yes.
think, can I go spiritual for a second? I think spiritually that's tied together because the parable of the talents is real. The master
Mhm.
entrusts, he goes away, he comes back and says, "What'd you do with what I entrusted?" And so, like, I got guys I'm talking to that have served teams of 10 that don't know why they're not getting marked increase. It's like because God can't trust you.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, so get serve teams for where you want to be, and then God will bless you, because he wants people to
Mhm.
get saved. He wants people to
Yeah.
engage in the local church. Right? So, like, we're not working
Absolutely.
against God, we're working with him. So, if we get serve teams loved on and trained up and plugged in, God will bring the increase.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, yeah, here's the harder thing in that. You talk about my story and revitalizing, was that means some leaders have to grow, some leaders have to go.
Yeah.
And part of that onboarding system is there's an on-ramp and an off-ramp. And I would say admittedly, there's a I did a lot of stuff wrong. I
Mhm.
I I got rid of a lot of leaders the wrong way, not a pastoral way, an aggressive way.
Mhm.
I can think of because the story of 60 to 600, if that's what we're titling it, it isn't all up and to the right. I mean,
Mhm.
I remember a serve team rally we did, like Landon was talking about, where I led it so poorly. A guy exploded and got up in my face and yelled at me in front of our entire serve team. So there's a way to do that and a way not to do that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
you need the right people. You need called people, not committed people.
Mhm.
Um, you need people who are serving, out of an overflow, not out of an obligation.
Yeah.
And
That's good.
so you got to immediately look at the team you have and ask the question, is this best for them?
Yeah.
Like, are
Yeah.
they in their sweet spot? And if they're not, how do I connect them to their sweet spot? And for some of y'all, just stomach it. Like that's gonna take a little confrontation,
Yeah.
and that's gonna take
Yeah.
you getting in the weeds and being like, hey
Yeah.
man, I don't feel like this is the best spot for you. But that goes back to some of those systems. So like so when you have an onboarding system, okay, well we have job descriptions and everyone commits to a school year. Well,
Mhm.
guess what? At the end of the school year, I can either onboard you back on or I can be like, hey, man, this just didn't feel like a fit. Can we talk about some of the stuff that felt like it went wrong this year?
Mhm.
And so you get some of those systems working for you, if that makes sense. I
Yeah.
don't know if that's where you
Absolutely.
wanted this to go, but like,
No, that is.
I would start again with like, how do I identify the right leader? How do I vision cast them into the ministry? How do I make it seamless for them to get involved? And then how do I train them on an ongoing basis so that way they are equipped to do more, not because I want more out of them, but because God wants more for them.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good.
And if you get
And
a big base, then you can reach and care for more people and God will bless that.
yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. In the words of the great philosopher, I am all about that base of volunteers.
I'm all about it. It's
Uh,
like, and so let me go practical. I think a good like student ministry kind of metric, like a thing I'm looking at. So, I coach student pastors all the time and, doing this small student ministry coaching package, right? I'm sure we'll talk about that too. But, one of the first things that I want to identify is like, what's your serve team ratios?
mhm.
And I can tell you by your serve teams what your growth capacity is, and I can tell you by how many serve team members you need to recruit, how much your ministry will grow in the next
Yeah.
6 months.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, because that was always we talk about the culture conundrum in one of our old courses that we're going to
Yeah,
hopefully re-release at some point. But, it's kind of this idea of like, okay, my culture's bad in my ministry, so I can't get more volunteers. So that makes my culture bad. And
yeah,
it's like, you got to reverse that because the thing is, if you grow your volunteer base, then your ministry grows. It's not, I get all these people and then it grows. When I was a student pastor, our biggest increase of growth when we crossed the 500 barrier was when our serve team really, really like probably went up by 30%, maybe even more than that. And so again, it's the principle of, you say the principle of the talents. I call it the principle of the ditch. You dig a ditch and you let God fill it.
yeah,
And so like if you pray for 100 people to receive Jesus, you better have 100 Bibles ready for
yeah,
them. You better set out 100. I remember walking into a speaking engagement, and they're like, "Yeah, you present the gospel." I was like, "How many counselors they got trained?" Like, "Well, I'm like, "What? We haven't even prepared for this, y'all. Like, why did you pay me to come do this when you didn't even prepare?"
Well, dude,
Uh,
to make that practical, I don't know if you remember this story, but I started as a next gen resident at Foothills Church, which meant
yeah,
that I worked for Greg Gibson, Jenny Haynes, Landon Reynolds, and
yeah,
Angela Tucker. And one night, my responsibility as the experience director for FC students was I oversaw the prayer and care team. We knew it was a big evangelism night. We were praying for 75 salvations. I did not set out 75 chairs. Guess how many kids responded? And there weren't enough chairs, there weren't enough Bibles, there weren't enough pens. And I'll never forget, not in like an overly aggressive, whatever. This is not that kind of illustration. But I remember you being close to my face and very like upset, like, why did you not set out 75 chairs?
yeah, yeah. And
And I think
we
what
both
I
learned
got,
that night of like,
yeah. Like what I
you
got
know,
to learn at 20 though, and what some of y'all need to relearn is like sometimes it's just exactly that.
yeah, yeah, for
Like
sure.
why do you need more serve team? Because you're praying for more students.
Yeah, for
And so
sure.
like, cool, you could have an awesome first time guest follow-up plan. You can have an awesome decision follow-up plan system, but if you don't have a leader system, then it's not going to happen. It's
Yeah,
just not.
100%. That's so good, man. Okay, so we go we got you have a you gotta have a gritty leader. You gotta cast vision. You gotta be the vision. Then you gotta put in some of those base level systems. Then you start getting momentum. We talk a lot
Yeah.
about momentum. So you started to catch momentum about year two, and how did you manage it?
Well, COVID killed it.
Yeah.
And it killed everyone's momentum. So then we had to gain it back. And when we started to get momentum back, what I realized is um, two things. One, most people work really, really hard to create a big splash, and then they try to gain what they can after it, right? So
Mhm.
you work the whole summer to a big August launch, and then you do it. But then after the launch, you have all the people to follow up with, but you're at your most burnout and tired with your least
Yeah.
resources because you just spent
Yeah.
most of your money, all that stuff.
Mhm.
It's terrible.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I realized, okay, what we need to do is we need to stack momentum, that everything is like dominoes. And so, how this is where I really began to say, okay, in August, how do we preach a vision? This is who we are, series, because I've spent long
Mhm.
enough now, the culture's established. How do we preach about who we are? But then it lands into and hits into, at the end of August, a big groups launch and
Yeah.
find life in Jesus, bring life to everything around us. And then from groups launch, how do I, land into something, the next series that's all about community and service that lands into the next
Yeah.
thing and to the next thing. So we began
Yeah.
to stack those. And then once we began to get the calendar working for us and not against us, like knowing our
Hmm.
green days and our yellow days and our red days, that's an attendance thing. If we get into coaching, we'll definitely teach you that.
Yep.
How do we get things flowing for us and not doing our most high effort thing on a really low impact night? Then it didn't feel like we were running uphill both ways. It felt
Yeah.
like things were going for us, and we kind of had this natural fill the room.
Yeah.
And from there, when you're revitalizing and when you're changing, what you realize is either you can make a change and try to win, or don't do that. I spent a long time trying to do that. Or you can win and let a win create a change.
Hmm.
And so when we started getting momentum going for us and we were winning so much and the room was full, we made a change and said, hey, the room is too full for us to meet. We need to change and we need to go middle school service and high school service,
Yeah.
and run 2 service times. And that brought a lot of logistical change. But guess what? We had the serve team to do it because we already were bigger than what we needed and we could make the change and we had the momentum. We weren't burning the candle on both ends. And when we, 2 years in, when we made that change and we launched, it was ultimately seen as a win of like, hey man, we're growing so much. And even through COVID and after it, that we need 2 services. We got another shot at momentum.
Yeah, absolutely. So, one thing that you've always done a good job at doing is if you stay planned out, you can create I use the word problem very lightly because you're not creating
Yeah.
like a sin or a moral dilemma or anything like that. You're creating a natural, well, probably a tension. Tension is
Yeah.
probably a better word. You're creating a tension that you already know the solution to.
Yep.
But what the tension does is it gets everybody else to agree on the solution that you've already planned and prepared for. So, for example, a lot of people go to middle school and high school when they're like, okay, it's either, oh no, we're not reaching middle schoolers very well.
So
We
we
need
need
to
to
do a
launch
middle
the
school
high
and high
school
school gathering.
service. It's like, okay,
Not the right thing to do.
no.
Okay, let me just go ahead and or they'll say, "Oh my goodness, it's August and our room's full," and you want to look at where you headed in 6 to 12 months, and then let those tensions bubble so they naturally create momentum. That's what you're saying, right?
Yep. Yeah. And then so the other thing is you have to tease that tension out to people. You got to make
Yeah,
sure that they see the tension because sometimes people don't. And so there would be times where I'd be standing against the wall and I'd be with our serve team and the room's packed out. I'm like, man, where are we going to put more kids? You know, like
yeah,
where
yeah,
we'd be doing groups and we're in all the rooms and then kids are in the hallway and they're on the floor and, they're in the XP side, which is like just basically this big open room where we did experience elements and games.
yeah.
And it's loud and it's noisy and it's echoing and
The
reverbing.
red
It's like,
zone. Did you call it the red
yeah,
zone? I hear that's a great idea.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Where do you think I got the idea? Um, and so it's like, man, what are we gonna do? And so you start putting that tension, and it's not, it's not a manipulative thing. It's a hey,
No,
like vision is what you can see, and so sometimes vision casting is, hey, do you see the problem?
yeah,
Because
yeah.
if you get people to
It's
see the
not
problem,
manipulation to lead a bunch of thirsty cows to water.
no, yeah. Like, here's what I'm saying: if you get people to see the problem, then you'll get them ready for the solution.
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
how many times when we're leading change, we'll say, hey, here's what we need to do, and people go, why?
yeah.
And the best way to answer why before it's asked is to point out the what. Hey,
Mm-hmm.
this is not working. What we're doing, we are running out of room. Like,
Mm-hmm.
we cannot add more group space this way. And so when we got all that momentum going, and we were running and we were gunning and we launched to 2 services, it felt like a major win. It was a change that everyone embraced, and it gave our ministry more momentum. And then we immediately got a fresh sense of like, man, even though we had the biggest serve team we've ever had at this point, we got to keep recruiting because now we're recruiting a middle school serve team and a high school serve team.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
um,
So, remember here. So, a lot of the guys that we work with are student pastors, of course, which the whole podcast today is on student ministry, but a lot are working in smaller context.
Sure.
Well, there's kind of this idea that I don't need all these systems, and I don't need the things that you're coaching me on because we're in a smaller context. Like, the Sweb has been on our podcast before. It's like, oh, it's different here. He always has that little bit that he does. And I apologize.
Yeah.
My daughter Charlie is currently screaming in the background. Um, but
Nah,
but
dude.
the idea is that, okay, so if you're going to spend the time to build a decision process, if you're going to spend the time to do volunteers, don't build it for where you're at, build it for where you're going. Because I would imagine that a lot of the systems that you built when it was 75, 60 people, when it was 60 people, are probably just about, maybe a little improvements, tweaks here and there, for 600. You built the ditch, and whether it was a little bit of water or it was a flood, it was running down those pipelines. And I just don't get, again, it's the preparation element. I just don't get when guys, they are only thinking about where they're at. Because what you said is, if you try to keep the students you have, you'll eventually just lose the students you have. So if you're thinking about, this is all we have, it's like, no. Where are we headed? Where are we going? Let's build for that. And then practically, it's like, why would you waste all this time building a system that works for 20 people? Then when God brings the growth, you're going to have to spend all this time building it again.
Yeah.
Like, let's build for scalability.
Well, two things there, man. I think one, I always just like to say, hey, what's the worst thing that can happen?
Yeah.
You serve the kids you have better.
Yeah.
Like, so that's not a thing. But I think what I've learned over the last 5 years, and this is not who I've always been. So, yeah, growth. I think what I've realized is that sometimes when it's like, man, this is all we have, that's a frustration more than a confession. I think sometimes it feels like we've got the grit, and maybe we don't have the system, and in frustration, and maybe even in a little bit of a hard place with the Lord, we're like, man, well, this is all we have. I don't need all that stuff because I just look around me and this is what we have and this is all we're going to have. And I think secretly sometimes that's a frustration and it's a fear. It's a frustration that it's like, man, this is all we have and I've been doing everything the best that I can. And sometimes it's a fear of like, man, this is all we have. I don't know if it's ever going to get any bigger than this. Does that mean I'm doing something wrong? Does that mean that I'm less than? Does that mean whatever? And I would just encourage people who are listening who maybe feel stuck in that to just say, hey, listen, God will bless your effort and bring increase if you're faithful to steward what he's given you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And sometimes that might look like you go 60 to 600. And sometimes it may look like you go from 20 to 40.
You double.
But we're talking about increase.
Yeah.
We're talking about, man, how do you how do you grow it? And I just think, man, it's not worth saying, well, there's not that many people, and so I'm not going to do that same thing. Well, you have the people you have, and then there's lost kids around you that God
Yeah.
wants to seek and save who are lost. And so
Mm-hmm.
the system still matters, whether you're staring down the barrel of 39,000 students within a 10-minute drive of your building, which is what I had, or just 3,000 at the local middle school and high school. Like it's the same thing.
Yeah.
And don't get caught in the frustration or the fear trap to say, well, that won't work here, because God's given us all the same mission, and that's to seek and save those who are lost. So
yeah, that's good, man. Yeah, and so there's a lot of people who listen to this who are leading in a smaller student ministry, and so one of the things that we're doing, if you listen to this in a year, we may not be doing this, but right now we're doing a small student ministry, small to medium-sized student ministry coaching package, and basically this is going to be our lowest investment point that we are ever going to offer. And a lot of you guys are like, hey, can we hop on a call? Can we hop on a call? We love to hop on a call, but we just can't keep hopping on calls.
we can't hop on every call.
Yeah. So what the small student ministry coaching package is really designed to do, it's supposed to be a really low investment point for your ministry. It's supposed to be a temporary thing because God's going to grow your ministry as well. And, and so we want, as we're able to prove that we can be a help to you, we do want you to invest more, but we want to get you in coaching because we want to help you. And we believe there's some kind of low-hanging fruit that we can help you put into place that's going to help your ministry get some momentum and start growing. And so if you are interested in being a part of that, Pat's going to, I'm currently full. Pat and another one of our coaches, Zach Jernigan, have some spots available for that. Very few spots, though, because we can only do a few of these. So if you're interested in that, go to simplystrategicministry.com/coaching. And you'll be able to find a link to sign up for a free call there. At that point in time, you'll just let us know, hey, we're interested in that small student ministry coaching. It's a month to month. It's set up like a subscription, so it's basically like Netflix. You get in, you schedule your calls with us, and then you get access to our team through our internal messaging app, which is called Slack. And you get access to the SSM at the lowest investment possible. And so if you are interested in that, go to our website, and we would love to start coaching you and start working you through some of these systems, and just to provide you a framework for you to begin to grow. We're not just going to listen to you talk about your problems. We want to help you grow. We want to let you get to work. It will be some accountability. And it's also great because if you're in a struggling context, sometimes it's hard to find help within your church. Everybody needs a coach, and usually people need coaches who are not a part of their current church to help them see their situation with fresh eyes. And so just to have somebody who's going to think about you, who's going to care for you, but is also going to tell you the truth and doesn't know anything about your boss or your church members and doesn't really care about your drama, just want to help you grow. Pat's your guy, Zach's your guy. We would love to help you make Simply Strategic Ministry your coaches. So, Pat, as always, we got to do this more often. We need to just hit record once a month and see what comes of it. This was incredibly helpful, dude. Thanks for being on the podcast as always. And hopefully some people will take your advice and begin to grow their ministry through simple strategies and scalable systems. Thanks for listening.